Did you know that a subtle doubt could be destroying your faith right now, and you might not even notice it? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that your faith has disappeared without you even noticing. Does that seem impossible? But that's exactly what could be happening to you right now, without warning, without any signs. Doubt starts small, almost silent, like a whisper. Does God really care about me? Is He really listening to me? If you've been feeling distant, lost, or directionless, it could be that this doubt has made its way invisibly to the depths of your soul, eroding your confidence. But here's the secret. These doubts don't have to be the end. They can be an opportunity for something transformative to happen, a chance to restore the faith you thought you had lost. You can reverse this process and grow even stronger. Let's find out how. What if I told you that even C.S. Lewis went through this? Yes, that same C.S. Lewis you see as a giant of faith. He also doubted, he also questioned, he also felt lost. Just imagine the impact of that. The man who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, the man who challenged the world with his faith. He had to fight against his own spiritual uncertainties. He experienced loss, pain, and often felt like his faith was about to break. But he didn't give up. He found a way. And that way is what can transform your life today. If Lewis could overcome his crises of faith, so can you. Now, imagine the worst-case scenario. You lose your faith without realizing it. But there is an answer, and it's right in front of you. What C.S. Lewis learned after going through so many crises is something that will shake the way you see God and your own faith journey. And the best part? This can start changing your life right now. Throughout this video, C.S. Lewis discovered a powerful secret to restoring faith. And this lesson isn't just his, it's yours if you choose to accept it. Want to know how? Stay with me until the end of the video and know that few truly discover how to overcome spiritual crises with unshakable faith. If you're looking for answers that few know, subscribe and gain access to deep lessons you won't find anywhere else. Who among us hasn't felt abandoned in the middle of prayer? Have you noticed how sometimes it seems like God isn't hearing your words? It's a feeling we've all experienced, right? You pray, you pour out your concerns, you talk about your struggles, but nothing happens. God's silence can be one of the greatest tests of faith, and it's precisely this silence that breeds doubt. Have you ever wondered why, when you need Him most, it seems like God is distant? It might be a feeling of loneliness, that He's not listening. It might be the lack of clear answers to something you've been praying about incessantly. Time goes by, and the doubt grows, until you start to question, did God hear me? Is my faith strong enough? And in the quiet of your heart, doubt grows. But this doubt, as painful as it is, can be the beginning of something deeper and more transformative. I want to tell you the story of Lucas, a young Christian who went through a crisis of faith that over time changed his life forever. Lucas was 28 years old, worked in an office, and like anyone else had his ups and downs. But one day his life turned upside down. He lost his job. It wasn't just the financial impact that shook him, but also his self-esteem. He had always believed that his profession was a way to serve God, but when he was fired, he felt like everything he had built was in vain. To make matters worse, he ended a long-term relationship with the person he believed was the partner of his life. Difficulties began to pile up, and life seemed increasingly purposeless. Lucas found himself in a spiral of doubt. During that time, he remembered the words he had learned in church, the ones that said God had a plan for his life. But the circumstances around him didn't seem to reflect that. He began to question whether God really cared. Why would He allow all this to happen? He prayed every day, but he felt like his words weren't getting past the ceiling. It was as if his prayers were being swallowed by emptiness. The anguish grew each day. He looked at his friends and saw how they were moving on with their lives, while he sank deeper into pain and frustration. Where is God? He wondered. Has He forgotten me? Are my prayers in vain? One lonely night, Lucas came across a book by C.S. Lewis, an author he knew from religion classes in school but had never read deeply. It was a book called The Problem of Pain. Lucas, driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, began to read. In chapter 4, he found something that made his heart stop for a moment. Do not fear your doubts. They are the starting point for a deeper relationship with God. Those words from Lewis were a ray of light in the darkness. Lucas had never thought of his doubts in that way. He had always thought that having doubts meant a lack of faith, something to be rejected and overcome. But C.S. Lewis was saying the opposite. He was saying that doubt, far from being an obstacle, could be a starting point for a deeper faith. Lewis spoke of a faith that doesn't deny questions, but embraces them. a kind of faith that emerges from dialogue with one's own doubts. Lucas realized that God's silence wasn't abandonment, but an invitation to draw closer. He learned that true faith isn't the absence of doubt, but the courage to keep believing even when everything seems uncertain. This discovery changed everything. Lucas began to pray not for immediate answers, but for a deeper connection with God. And you? Are you ready to turn your doubts into stronger faith? Lucas's doubt didn't drive him away from God. On the contrary, it was through the doubt that he experienced spiritual renewal. He began to realize that, as Lewis taught, true faith doesn't come from the absence of questions, but from the willingness to seek truth, even when it doesn't come immediately. Today, Lucas is an example of unshakable faith. He became stronger and closer to God, not because his circumstances changed immediately, but because he changed. He found a new confidence in God, a confidence that doesn't depend on quick answers or perfect circumstances, but is based on the understanding that God is with him, even in moments of silence. And you, my friend, have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like Lucas, not knowing where to turn, not knowing what to do with the doubts that arise in your faith? The good news is that, like Lucas, you too can turn your doubt into something powerful. You too can find the strength to grow spiritually, even when the path seems uncertain. With Lucas and C.S. Lewis, we've seen how spiritual crises and doubts aren't the end of our faith journey, but the beginning of something deeper and more transformative. Use your doubts as a chance to grow. Don't let God's silence discourage you, but see it as an opportunity to draw closer to him. Lucas was a young Christian who suddenly found himself in a moment of spiritual crisis. Life seemed to be crumbling around him, and he didn't know how to deal with the pain he was feeling. Facing financial difficulties, the end of a relationship, and a constant sense of failure, he began to wonder if God really loved him or if he was being ignored. Every prayer seemed to get lost in the void, and Lucas wondered if his words were reaching God. Each day was a silent battle, and he felt the weight of doubt growing within him. Has God forgotten me? Lucas thought. Are my prayers useless? I've tried so many times, but nothing changes. He felt abandoned, as if he were alone in his pain, and doubts began to take over his mind. As time went on, he drifted away from faith, unable to understand why God seemed silent when he needed him most. He saw other Christians around him who seemed to have unshakable faith, but he couldn't find that kind of confidence. He felt that while others were being heard, his own prayers were being ignored, and that left him completely lost. It's a deeply human dilemma. We've all had moments of doubt where our faith is tested. The feeling that God is absent, that our prayers are just empty words, is a heavy burden. And, worse still, doubt begins to erode our confidence, making us question the truth of God's promises. That feeling of being alone in our spiritual struggle is overwhelming, but Lucas wasn't alone. Many of us have faced these feelings of abandonment and divine silence. However, his story doesn't end in the abyss of doubt. Then something unexpected happened. Lucas found, in an old book by C.S. Lewis, a sentence that, like a light at the end of the tunnel, made him stop and reflect deeply. The sentence said, "Do not fear your doubts. They are the starting point for a deeper relationship with God." Those words from Lewis struck Lucas like an arrow to the heart. He had always thought that doubt was the enemy of faith, something to be feared and avoided at all costs. But there, in front of him, was an idea he had never considered. What if, instead of being the opposite of faith, doubt was a gateway to a deeper relationship with God? Lucas stopped to reflect. He remembered how, in all the difficult moments of his life, he had never truly stopped praying, even though he had doubted. He prayed sincerely, even if without hope. He expressed his pain, his fear, and his frustration to God. And looking back, he realized that even when he didn't see immediate answers, prayer was never an empty act. The fact that he was there, praying, was already a sign of faith. And doubt didn't mean he lacked faith, but that he was being honest with God. Lucas remembered how C.S. Lewis, in his own moments of spiritual crisis, had struggled with doubt. Lewis had lost his wife, suffered intense pain, and yet found the strength to believe. Lewis himself wrote in his book, Letters to Malcolm, that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to trust God even when we don't have all the answers. For Lucas, this was revelatory. The idea that doubt wasn't something to be feared, but rather an opportunity for spiritual growth, changed everything for him. He began to see his own crises of faith in a new light. Instead of focusing on unanswered questions, he began to focus on the fact that he was, in some way, seeking answers. And that search was a form of relationship with God. Even in divine silence, he wasn't alone. This shift in perspective wasn't immediate, but over time, Lucas felt more strengthened in his faith. He realized that instead of avoiding doubts, he could use them as a starting point for a deeper dialogue with God. He began to ask bolder questions, but in a different way, not as someone demanding answers, but as someone seeking greater intimacy with the Father. What happened next was transformative. Lucas not only began to pray more sincerely, but he also began to see God's presence in a different way. Instead of seeing the absence of answers as the absence of God, he began to understand that often God's silence is an opportunity to develop a more mature faith, a faith that goes beyond easy answers and sustains itself even when circumstances aren't favorable. Over time, Lucas realized that his faith had been strengthened in a way he never imagined possible. His struggle with doubt wasn't a weakness, but a catalyst for a deeper relationship with God. He became more confident, more resilient, because he understood that true faith isn't about having all the answers, but about trusting God, even in the midst of uncertainty. Just as C.S. Lewis found, Lucas discovered that God doesn't withdraw in our doubts, but calls us to draw closer to him. Doubt, instead of driving him away, brought Lucas closer to God, allowing him to experience a stronger, truer, and more unshakable faith. Today, Lucas looks back and sees his journey of doubt as one of the most precious parts of his spiritual walk. He understands that faith isn't a straight line, but a journey of ups and downs, of doubts and certainties, of moments of silence and moments of deep intimacy with God. Every doubt he had was an opportunity to trust more, to seek more, to grow more. He learned that true faith isn't about having unshakable faith all the time, but about continuing to trust even when faith seems fragile. And in doing so, he found an unshakable faith, built on trust in a God who never abandons us, even when we don't understand what's happening around us. If you're feeling like Lucas, lost in your doubts, unsure if God is hearing your prayers, remember that doubt isn't the end of faith, but the beginning of something much deeper. As C.S. Lewis teaches us, doubt doesn't have to drive you away from God. It can be the key to a more intimate and genuine relationship with Him. It's in the midst of doubt that we can learn to trust more, to grow more, and to draw closer to the God who never abandons us. And when you look back, you'll see that your doubts weren't barriers to your faith, but the steps that led you to a level of trust you never imagined reaching. Has Lucas's story touched your heart? Not everyone can see the power of these lessons. If you're one of the few who understand this depth, leave a like. Sometimes a simple gesture expresses what words cannot, and be part of this group of sincere seekers. When I was preparing this video, something surprising happened. Not only was I dedicating myself to understanding the powerful lessons of C.S. Lewis, but I was also confronted with a painful truth about my own faith. I'm not immune to the doubts I so often speak about. Life, with its turbulence and challenges, can make us question everything. Is God listening to me? Is He really by my side? I was in one of those moments where the answer seemed distant, and to be honest, I didn't know if I was on the right path. I realized that this wasn't just Lucas's feeling. That young Christian I shared with you earlier. This was also real for me. As C.S. Lewis so often wrote, faith isn't something we have because everything always goes well. Faith is something that strengthens in the storm, in moments of doubt, and especially when we question where God is. So, as I delved into Lewis's teachings, something changed. The way he dealt with his own crises of faith gave me a new angle, and I knew I needed to share this with you. Lewis, in his personal journey, went through periods of immense pain and questioning about God's existence. He lost his wife, Joy, and was consumed by the pain of watching her suffer from aggressive cancer. During that time, he wrote about the endless nights when he found himself with faltering faith, wondering where God was in the midst of suffering. I, for a moment, felt that too. The emptiness of unanswered prayers, the despair of feeling like our prayers seem to get lost in the wind. But true transformation occurs when we're willing to acknowledge our weaknesses, our doubts, and still trust that God is there, even if we can't see or feel Him. When Lewis wrote about pain and doubt, he was telling us something essential. True faith isn't built on easy answers, but on the courage to keep believing, even when everything around us makes us question. Reflecting on these moments of vulnerability, I understood something very profound. We don't need to hide our doubts or spiritual fears. When we accept our humanity, when we recognize that our crises of faith aren't signs of failure, but opportunities for growth, transformation begins to happen. That's exactly what happened with Lewis. He used his doubts as a springboard for an even deeper faith. Now let me talk a little more about how this was reflected in my own creative process while making this video. I was faced with a big decision. How can I convey this in a way that not only makes sense, but truly touches the hearts of those watching? I decided to be vulnerable. I knew this was a moment of intimacy. It's not about showing only the answers I found along the way, but about sharing the real struggle, the journey of pain and healing. Because in the end, that's what we're all looking for, a place where we can be authentic, where our doubts don't define us, but make us stronger. There was a moment in my life when my faith was being challenged in a way I had never imagined. I was going through a personal crisis, a series of losses that affected me deeply. As life pushed me to the limit, one question hammered in my mind. Where is God in all this? Why does he seem so distant when I need him most? These doubts consumed me. I began to wonder if my faith was real, or if I was just believing out of habit. I remember moments when I prayed and it seemed like my words dissipated into the air. There was no answer, no comfort, only silence. And to be honest, it was in that silence that I began to question if I was doing something wrong or if God was really ignoring me. I know many of you have felt this way. Maybe you've also faced moments of pain and didn't know how to pray, or even if your prayers were reaching anywhere. That's normal. We've all been through those moments. But something began to change when I decided to stop fighting my doubts and started accepting them. Deep down, I knew that doubt didn't have to drive me away from God. In fact, it could bring me closer to him if I was willing to be honest with my feelings. I remembered the words of C.S. Lewis, who wrote that doubts are not enemies of faith, but rather its allies. He didn't see doubt as a weakness, but as an opportunity to grow, and that's what I did. I began to ask hard questions. I reread Lewis's works, especially The Problem of Pain, where he talks about how pain is a fundamental part of the spiritual journey. Pain can be a portal to a deeper faith, and I began to see that differently. I shared Lucas's story with you, but in truth, this was also my story. I found in Lewis a guide who helped me out of this maze of doubts and pain. I remembered something powerful. He said, "Do not fear your doubts. They can lead you to a place of stronger faith than you ever imagined." Reflecting on this, I understood that doubt isn't a sign that our faith is weak, but that we're seeking something deeper. We're human, and if we allow it, our doubts can be the fertile ground where God can plant us to grow in his truth. That was a transformative lesson. Now I want you to think, what do you do with your doubts? Do you ignore them? Or do you use them as an opportunity to draw closer to God? If you allow yourself, your faith can become unshakable, not in spite of your doubts, but because of them. I want you to think about this. This video can be more than just help. It can be the key for someone struggling with doubt, someone stuck in a spiritual crisis and not knowing where to start. If you know someone who feels lost in their faith, this video can be an invitation to a new beginning. It's not just a video. It's a reminder that even when everything seems uncertain, God is with us. Imagine you watching this video and thinking, I need to share this. This is where social currency comes in. When you share something meaningful, something that truly touches your soul, you're saying, I care. And it's not just about you. It's about the person who needs to hear these words, that friend or family member whose faith is wavering. You have the chance to be part of someone's restoration. So if you feel this video can impact someone, share it now. It's not just about views, but about lives being touched, transformed. Don't miss the opportunity to make a difference in someone else's life. Together, we can spread hope and faith, and more people can discover the strength of unshakable faith. Many of us have experienced it at some point, the feeling that our prayers are falling into emptiness. Have you ever felt like you were praying in vain? Like you were talking to someone who isn't listening? That feeling of loneliness in prayer is one of the greatest tests of our faith. And believe me, you're not alone in that feeling. I remember a conversation with a friend named Juliana. She told me about a period in her life when she spent months in prayer, but felt like God was distant. She was facing financial problems. Her life seemed to be falling apart and she wondered, does God really hear me? Is he listening to my prayers? That kind of doubt is devastating, isn't it? I know what it's like to feel lost, like your prayers are being ignored, like there are no answers. But what C.S. Lewis teaches us is that these moments of divine silence don't mean God has abandoned us. Instead, They're opportunities for our faith to grow. Lewis, with his profound wisdom, reminds us that doubt isn't the enemy of faith, but part of it. Maybe you're living this right now. The answers aren't coming, the promises seem distant, and you wonder if God still cares. But I want you to know, doubt doesn't mean your faith is weak. On the contrary, it can be the foundation for a stronger faith, a faith that when challenged becomes unshakable. Don't give up. God's silence can be an invitation for you to go deeper into Him, not a sign that He's forgotten you. I understand how hard it is when faith wavers. I've been there, and I know how painful it is. When you're at the bottom of the pit with no way out, all you want is for God to speak to you clearly and audibly. But often, He challenges us to trust Him, even when the answer doesn't come immediately. C.S. Lewis taught me something that completely changed my perspective. True faith doesn't come from the absence of doubt, but from the courage to face it. He said that by embracing our doubts with sincerity, we draw closer to God. It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But when you face doubt head on, you're actually building a stronger, deeper faith. I want you to think about this for a moment. What if your doubt wasn't something to drive you away from God, opportunity to build an even stronger connection with Him? What if, instead of despairing when you feel doubt, you could face it with courage, knowing that behind it, God is calling you to a new level of intimacy? I understand the pain you feel when faith wavers, but know this: doubt is just a step on the journey to a deeper, firmer faith. And when you look back, you'll realize that it was in that moment of doubt that your faith became truly unshakable. I know you're wondering, how can I apply all this in my life? Here are some phrases that, if you truly internalize them, can transform the way you approach doubt. First phrase: doubt doesn't drive you away from God, it draws you closer. Second phrase: God doesn't just respond to your faith, but also to your sincere questioning. These phrases are more than words. They're powerful declarations that can change your perspective. I invite you to repeat them when you feel like you're losing control. When doubt arises, remember that it's not a sign of weakness, but an opportunity to grow stronger in your faith. Share these phrases with someone who needs to hear them, not just as a reminder, but as a real turning point for those in spiritual crisis. When you share, you're doing more than spreading a video. You're offering hope that can restore someone else's faith. C.S. Lewis believed that doubts shouldn't be ignored or feared. On the contrary, he saw them as an invitation to a deeper relationship with God. So how can you apply this in your life? 1. Pray sincerely. Don't be afraid to be honest with God. Talk about your doubts, your fears, your frustrations. Sincere prayer, even without immediate answers, strengthens your relationship with Him. 2. Trust in God's promises. Even if you don't see or feel anything in the moment, trust what the Bible says about God's faithfulness. He never abandons us. Remember that often God's silence is an opportunity for you to go deeper into Him. 3. Seek intimacy, not immediate answers. In moments of doubt, seek greater intimacy with God. The answer may not come instantly, but the growth you experience on the journey will be transformative. C.S. Lewis teaches us that faith is built in the fire of doubt. Don't be afraid to question. Instead, use it as an opportunity to strengthen your faith. Now is the moment of transformation. Have you felt the pain of doubt? Have you wondered if your faith is really strong enough? Believe me, you're not alone. Lucas, like you, went through moments of deep questioning. But what he learned, and what you can learn now, is that doubts aren't enemies of faith. They can be the door to something much greater. C.S. Lewis, with his wisdom, teaches us that true faith doesn't arise from the absence of doubt, but from the power to confront and overcome it. Your insecurities can be the starting point for a firmer, truer, more unshakable faith. So, ask yourself, are you ready to strengthen your faith even when it's challenged? What would you do if you knew that your doubts could transform into a solid foundation for your trust in God? That's the journey of renewal I'm inviting you to start today. Don't wait any longer. If you're ready to turn your doubts into unshakable faith, subscribe now and start this journey with us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Together, we can strengthen our faith and help others do the same.